Do you want me to give your name?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Bob Gaskin, Black Dog Survival School.
Yeah, so what was that again? Bob Gaskin?
With Black Dog Survival School.
Black Dog Survival School. So Black Dog, G-O-G?
Yep.
Now, you've also written some books too, Bob.
That's correct. I've written Society Indian Events, the first 180 days.
Right.
We've got 2 new books coming out, but we're releasing them in some expos this spring.
Now, so go ahead with those books. What are they?
One is The Morals of Survival, and the other is Getting Prepared Through the Eyes of a Child.
Very good. We should get you on the show to talk about some of these things because people don't have a childlike looking at the reality. They think that the normalcy bias, they don't think anything bad could happen.
Correct.
Let's start. You had a contact last week with a retiring DHS officer, and apparently you were being followed and photographed, and 2 DHS agents tracked you and requested back documents that he had given you. And there were 2 issues that were brought up that he whistleblowed to you, and you gave it to John Moore. One is that in the financial event, somewhere between the 1st to the middle of April this year, that was going to be very catastrophic. The other was a near space object, about 3.5 miles in size, that was likely, without any intervention, to impact the Caribbean. Obviously, we have our space command that can divert it or blow it up, and I have familiar with that because I took care of employees there at Space Command 20 years ago in Colorado Springs. We need to talk about what kind of material he told you and anything more exact about what John mentioned on the show on Friday in terms of both of those events.
Okay, I'm not sure what John told you.
Well, what he told us basically, he didn't know what kind of event was going to happen in April, but he's going to be. So if you can flesh that out, and then we'll get into the issue in September with this near space object that apparently, if you're going to talk about a cataclysmic event, you can't track an earthquake. So it's obviously a near space object that, if without any deviation in its trajectory, it's likely to strike the Earth at that time.
Right. Well, first, I don't know how to say this. I'm not authorized to confirm what group my source worked for, nor am I authorized to confirm what agency requested the documents back. Okay.
Yeah, I know that. I know. We've already talked about that, though.
Yeah, that part I have to clarify. Okay,
you're by not authorized, meaning you can't admit it, although we already know it.
Something like that. Okay, so basically there's 2 events on the horizon that we're looking at. One is a financial meltdown, and that we're looking at that in as early as April. What we've got going along with that is there's several factors at play here. One has to deal with the International Bank of Disputes in Basel, Switzerland.
Yeah, talk about the Bank of International Settlements. It's a bank of banks where they loan and buy money from each other. Right?
Right. A lot of people are concerned about who actually owns the Federal Reserve. Okay? And if anybody that wants to do a little research on that, what they'll find is that our central bank, the Federal Reserve, along with 13 other nations' central banks, are all owned by the International Bank of Disputes, which is in Basel, Switzerland. They're the authors of the Basel I, Basel II, and Basel III Accords, which dictate international trading.
Right.
More importantly, the International Bank of Disputes is further owned by the World Bank. Okay? A couple things have happened recently that very few people are aware of, mainly because they're not looking in that direction. Okay? One is the government shutdown in October had absolutely nothing to do with Obamacare. It had nothing to do with the Republicans wanting certain things from the Democrats. What it boiled down to is that since June of last year, the Federal Reserve has been the only entity in the world that's buying our debt. The June auction for our Treasury bonds was the first time in over 50 years, actually over 70 years, where other nations did not attend that meeting, that auction, to purchase our debt.
Right.
The only entity that's been buying our debt since June is the Federal Reserve. So
right.
in October, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay. In October, when we had our government deal with was the Federal Reserve, in order to accept responsibility for the next 6 months of debt at the tune of $82 to $83 billion a month. They wanted a concession. That concession was that in November, December, and January, the interest rates would rise 0.3%. Obviously, the interest rates did not rise 0.3% in those 3 months. So we're actually in default in our contractual obligations to the Federal Reserve in exchange for them covering our debt and loaning us $82 billion a month.
Yeah.
So what's happening is the October agreement was a 6-month agreement. So there's a couple key points here. One, the October agreement expires on March 31st. At that point in time, there's a huge question as to whether or not the Federal Reserve will continue to loan us money after that, because we reneged basically on our obligations toward that contract. But further, parts of the Basel II Accords and almost all of the Basel III Accords have to deal with nations pretty much not following through with their obligations, and which is further destabilizing the global financial market. In Basel II, they basically stipulated that for international trading, any loans that you received, you had to back with hard assets. It could be land, it could be gold, is irrelevant, but it had to be a hard, tangible asset. And if you remember back in December, we lost a lot of our federal lands to the United Nations. The reason we lost our federal lands to the United Nations is because the International Bank of Disputes sold some of our contractual debt to the United Nations as a result of us defaulting on our obligations in that loan.
So now how much federal land disappeared and went to the United Nations?
Right now, the last numbers I saw dealing with that were from January, and as of the middle of January, it was a little over 2.1 million acres. But the issue isn't just the fact that it's 2.1 million acres of federal land, because only 1.6 million acres of that was federal land that's here in the continental United States. So we lost 500,000 acres of U.S. government-owned land abroad. Well, the only place this could be would be embassies or military bases overseas. So that's a huge issue. The fact that we ceded acres of our property to the United Nations of all places, right? And that 500,000 acres is overseas on our military bases.
Right. Can you?
Serious problem.
Okay. Can you hold 1 second? I gotta get another call here. I'll be right back. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. This is a part 2 of Bob Gaskin's report of blackdogsurvivalschool.com. So let's continue on the financial issues. So what you're saying basically is June of last year, during the meeting when other nations buy our treasury bonds, the only party there was the treasury was the U.S. Treasury, and the Fed Reserve literally was creating money out of nothing, and handed over millions of square acres of our territory to the United Nations in December, with the proviso that they get an increase in interest rates December, January, February. Is that right?
No, November, December, January.
November, December, January. So they didn't get their 0.2% increase, which of course would have been very bad if they did get an increase because credit's already squeezed. What's happening now, because they've done this tapering, which is decreasing the amount of money, how does that tie in with it? Because the tapering is the reduction under the new Fed chair, Yellen, where they went from 85 billion to decrease it, I think 10 billion to 75 billion. But I think their plans are to decrease it further. What's happening there? How does that tie in with this?
Well, it's more than just that. There's 5 key factors, 5 major events in our financial world that have taken place in the last 6 to 8 months that are huge, that are all coming together the 1st of April. Okay?
Right.
One is the fact that we're lowering quantitative easing.
Right. Yeah, and that's causing a interest rate spike in all the second world countries like Turkey, India, South Africa, where it's gone 15 to 18% to keep the capital from flying out of their countries.
Correct, but it's not just there. We've already seen it here. For example, many of the larger national banks, if you have an account with them, you want to transfer, say you want to do a wire transfer of funds, you're limited now in the amount of funds you can transfer here domestically as well as internationally. And according to the Basel III
Right. So in other words, it has to have physical assets. If a country wants to borrow, they have to actually collateralize physical assets.
Correct. But now the warning signs are there that we're starting to see in countries like the United States, Canada, Great Britain. We're starting to see the same effects in nations like that we were seeing in second and third world countries. For example, J.P. Morgan Chase announced just, I want to say it was earlier this week, it might have been last week, that they're laying off 7,000 employees. Brokers are going to lay off another 6,000. With that same report came out that there is a potential for Bank of America to do the same and follow suit to J.P. Morgan Chase.
Well, we know there's a lot of swan diving bankers that are dying. So I think it's up to 20 bankers in the last few years, and a lot of them are clustered, even looking at the same spreadsheet. So obviously something catastrophic is coming, and bankers are dying over it.
Right, and that's what it all boils down to. There's, like I was saying, there's several events. Okay, event number one, the Federal Reserve is now the only entity buying our debt. That's huge. That's number one. Number two.
Does that mean China's no longer buying our debt? Because that could affect trade relations, because they now have most favored nation trade status, and that would probably indicate that China basically is because what happened is 4 years ago China decided to not let us own more than 50% of any corporations, and actually shut out international investment. And then the international corporations basically said, well, they start pulling their money out. So China let them back in a couple of years ago, but their policy in China is very aggressive. They won't let any international corporation own more than 50% of any corporation in China.
It's so much more than just that. Okay, on September 22nd, on my radio show, I announced somewhere around September 22nd that on September 22nd, Great Britain signed a treaty with China stating that they would no longer use the U.S. dollar to purchase bulk foodstuffs and petroleum products.
Oh, you're kidding.
That same day, the G20 summit unanimously voted to follow suit. 1 week to the day later, on September 29th, the European Union signed the same treaty. Now, the stipulation of that treaty was that China had to back the yuan with gold and silver. Okay? So if you notice, if you look at the markets in October, November, December, what did you see? You saw China doing mass purchases of gold and silver while at the same time liquidating their U.S. debt.
Right.
But the biggest push has come in the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, five bankers, five senior executive officials in the financial industry all committed suicide, one a day, every day that week. Okay?
Right.
The same thing, the very following week, what did we see? China liquidated 23% of its U.S. holdings in debt, 23%. And they forced other nations to take on that debt, to purchase that debt in exchange for being able to have senior trading status with them.
Right.
Okay? So, if you remember correctly, the first week of October, we started seeing all over the mainstream news that China was making a play to become the world's reserve currency.
Right.
They had already become the world's reserve currency as long as they met the contractual obligations, and they have done that. The yuan is about to go live, being the only top currency in the world that is backed, actually truly 100% backed by gold and silver.
Is the yuan, because they also have a lot of gold mines in China too.
Exactly.
But the largest gold mines in the world are in Alaska and in British Columbia.
I can believe that.
Yeah, way more gold there than China or anywhere else.
Okay.
We're sitting on mountains and mountains of gold.
Gotcha. So what we're seeing is that's two shifts. Shift number one is the Federal Reserve is the only entity buying our debt. Shift number two is China's making a play to be the reserve currency of the world. We've seen, if you look back to the early 70s, the food riots and the gas riots and everything else that was going on in Great Britain, that was a result of Great Britain no longer being the reserve currency of the world.
Right.
When we took that status. Okay. The third thing that we're looking at is the fact that we violated our agreement with the Federal Reserve as stipulated in October. So come May 31st, there's a huge question as to whether the Federal Reserve is even willing to loan us any additional money to fund April, May, and June. But more importantly, we don't know if the World Bank is going to allow the International Bank of Disputes to allow the Federal Reserve to loan us any more money.
Well, first off, the Fed Reserve, firstly, is a fraud, and it has an exclusive right to coin American currency. So, although they're making this fancy dance, what they're really trying to move forward is not a yuan as a currency, but a world biometric currency, which is called the mark of the beast. So when I hear that the Federal Reserve is trying to play this game of blackmailing us, the Federal Reserve is us. We are the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, which is a foreign corporation, is controlling the corporation called America and has the exclusive right to coin all our currency. The Treasury doesn't. They should, but they haven't been doing it for 100 years. So I think the entire thing is a fraud. And when the Federal Reserve says they're going to threaten us like that, it's like, come on, it's like threatening the right hand threatening your left arm. You're going to chop the left arm off. Right? So when they're threatening that, what they're saying to the powers that be inside the government, we want to turn your country into a base for a new world biometric currency, and the only currency that's basically printed enough Federal Reserve dollars. Because although the Chinese currency, there's a lot of money they printed, they've increased their total debt from $8 trillion to $24 to $25 trillion in 5 years. Much more than the Federal Reserve or the Bank of Europe or the Bank of Japan. What they've done is there's many quadrillions of dollars out there in Federal Reserve notes. So as much as they play this game, you can print trillions of dollars and it still wouldn't inflate the currency in America. But you can, if you print renminbi or yuan, or you print currencies in Europe, the euros, it'll massively inflate them and cause hyperinflation. But it wouldn't be the same with the Federal Reserve note. So when I hear that story, or I hear the story that they're going to get rid of the petrodollar, the full force of the American and NATO military will come down on any nation that tries to get rid of the petrodollar. So I don't buy that the Federal Reserve can do that to us. It would simply be a swing of the pen, and America would just simply start coining our own money. And we just tell them we just dissolve the debt and write it off in the books. And all these nations holding our debt, including China, would be stuck. And if they can't sell their products to us because they're not trading with America, because Europe certainly isn't a big trading partner, China has sunk. They have 100,000 warehouses they've built in the last 5 years storing stuff that they've built that they can't even put in ships and send it over to sell it. So China is playing this very, very big game with the international bankers, and China is already sunk as far as I'm concerned. They're already finished. They may be playing this game that they're the world reserve currency. That's a 19th century ploy that gold somehow is backing it. What's backing it is cybernetic divots in a supercomputer that they're building in America, because all the quantum computing on the planet is controlled by America. So we are the author of the mark of the beast. America is. And that's where we're headed. So the Federal Reserve is playing this game because they're getting ready to force on the planet a single currency system that'll include not only Russia, which doesn't have a reserve bank like the Rothschilds, Iran, Syria, and Korea, and North Korea, and Cuba, and they want to force them all to have an international exchange system like BIS. Only this one will be not the Bank of International Settlements, where banks exchanging money through exchanges, but a virtual currency system where they have total control of all currencies and all transactions, and have biometric linkage to every individual that buys or sells anything. So they'll say that they're going to do this, but really it's for public consumption. What's really happening is we're moving very swiftly toward the mark of the beast. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes.
Yeah, the Chinese can dig as much gold up as they want. I already know from working there in British Columbia 30 years ago, plus, actually more than that, 35, we had enough gold in Williams Lake, north of central British Columbia, to be more than all the gold that was ever mined, by many times. And then even bigger is the mine up in Alaska. So we have so damn much gold, it's ridiculous. And so if you look at that, then we look at our gas and oil. We got so much oil and gas, it's ridiculous. And even strategic metals, look in Montana and Wyoming. I mean, we got tons of strategic metals. So anything that China thinks they have, we have in spades. And China has received technology from us, including space technology, for their space program, and it's a joke. It's 1960s technology, and yet we're in the 21st century, 60 years ahead of them, and they're pretending that they could take on America. It's foolish. Now, the Russians, of course, could use nuclear weapons, but we have level 10 Tesla weapons that could literally set up a plasma explosion over any city in Russia without even firing a missile. So they want us to believe that we're going to fight a 1950s or 60s war when America is in the 22nd century.
Who wants us to believe that we're going to fight a 1960s and 70s war.
The globalists want, and the news media want us to believe that America doesn't have this advanced technology. They want us to believe that we're just going to lay down and let us be attacked. That's why they put out policies like PDD 60. So the Federal Reserve may do this because for public consumption, the traders on the exchanges and the bankers and the other people want to believe this farce, so they can carry out their ultimate scheme, which is to get rid of all currencies. And that, by the way, will include the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. I'm sure Bitcoin was brought down by a special cybernetic task force set up by the globalists to make sure they crashed it, because they don't want any other cryptocurrencies that are encrypted, highly encrypted, or using barter to rise, so that the globalists have total control. Because this new world currency won't be backed by gold. It'll be backed by electronic divots. It'll be channelized against literally us as people and everything we own. So that's where we're going. There's not a person living that has ever had a breath or a pulse that knows more about the mark of the beast than I do. I was brought supernaturally to Colorado Springs over 20 years ago, worked there under Q-level security clearance, took care of employees there, and have been inside the quantum array of the actual supercomputer for the mark itself. I've been inside it, talked to technicians, know everything from the software to the satellite uplinks to everything you can imagine. I know, and I have a photographic memory and advanced technological training. Everything. And I'm going to I put much of it together 15 years ago when I traveled with the Prophecy Club, called Iridium Mark of the Beast, to 42 cities in Israel. But I know a lot more than that. And what I see coming is they're going to have a series of cataclysms that will all be scripted, so that they can create the type of crisis that people will buy into or believe, so they will hand over all of their authority and creating capital and credit to an international agency that will use biometrics. So the idea that China is going to use gold and sequester a lot of gold. Gold is only good for personal bartering. It's not good for public currency. It's through a public exchange system. And the government will make it illegal. In fact, they'll eventually make, as it says in the Bible, they'll make even gold canker and make it rust. In other words, it will be illegal tender to use gold, silver, or any other electronic bartering system. The government wants prescient control of all transactions, all exchanges, all transfer of wealth. So if you even give $10 to your kid, they want to be able to know how many electronic divots they get in their pocket. That's how bad it is. And I know in exquisite detail everything about it. Interesting, hey? But what you're saying is, it doesn't mean what you're saying isn't true by this DHS agent, because that's the blather they're feeding their own agents, because they have to, and they want to even have the stuff leaked, because they have to have it leaked so that they can build up the story that this is what's happening next. Firstly, the number one thing is that 90% of all currency in the world exchanges are through the American dollar, even now. 60% are in American dollar, Federal Reserve notes, and 30% goes for the petrodollar. And even if Britain made this treaty with China, which I don't doubt that they might have, first off, why would you have a North American treaty alliance if Britain is literally dissolving the American currency? Or the EU is going to do that. Why would America come to the aid of Europe for anything if they're going to destroy our currency by making special side trade arrangements with China? China's the enemy. China and Russia are not our friends. People need to get that straight. You know, it's historically a fact that Ukraine is not going to go, be left. I was listening to Joel Skousen that he thinks it'd wait a decade before they want to start a war. I beg to differ. 2 hours after the Crimean president asked for a request, or premier, of that district asked for a request, they fulfilled it and just moved troops across the border to Ukraine. Russians aren't going to let them go. And same way, they're not going to let Syria be taken over. And they've given the S-300 anti-aircraft and anti-missile system, the Yukon hypersonic cruise missiles, over to the Syrians. If they start doing an attack on Syria, the Syrians will just sink our entire navy. And I know, because I talk to military experts who have on the show regularly, munitions experts, that we're done. we're actually already finished before we get on the battlefield, and we haven't rebuilt our weapon systems for years. So we have a fool in the White House who has basically not rearmed our system with more effective systems, wasted a lot of money, cut the pensions and the benefits to veterans and abused them, and now wants to build down the military force to a tiny fragment of what it used to be. So Obama is an abomination. And of course, the physicists that I had on my show 5 years ago told me that they were meeting in Moscow after Glasnost and Perestroika in 1992, and they were told by two Russian physicists who are also members of the GRU that Obama would be our future president, and at the time he wasn't even a junior senator in Illinois. So he was selected by Zbigniew Brzezinski with communists and globalists. And they're communists and globalists in Russia, as well as globalists here in George Washington University, and people like Zbigniew Brzezinski that transcend political ideologies such as capitalism or crony communism or just plain corruption, which is worldwide. And globalists don't care what system as long as they have control of it. So I don't doubt that these things are going to happen. But what we need to do is see beyond the story that they want us to know and realize that they do want us to spread leaks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes...
Yeah, in other words, if they didn't have somebody like Bob Gaskin and Dr. Bill Deagle, they'd have to invent us and pay us. The fact that we're unpaid operatives by spreading information, even if it's true, because it's a lower level of the story, because there's a higher levels of space chess going on here.
Okay, wait a minute. Let me see if I understand this correctly. You're saying that there's one group, the globalists, that are controlling all of these governments of the world?
Well, let me give you the structure, okay? The top organization that runs the world is the Council of the Druids. There's 13 chairs in that council. The 13th chair is sat in by a man called the Pindar, which means the penis of the dragon, and he works directly for Satan. Okay? The bearer of light, the galactic cosmic demonic power that controls the evil dark side in this area of the cosmos. And there's many, and he has underneath him many organizations that sit on this council, including the Jesuits and the bankers. And the banking has been all handed down through the Babylonian, Talmudic, Satanistic Jews. And they aren't Jews, really. They're, as Jesus would say, the synagogue of Satan. So all the money coined in all of the Rothschild-type banks in the world is coined under the control, and everything has been hypothecated and advanced and controlled and owned by the Vatican. Every single nation on earth, except for these ones that I just mentioned, Russia, North Korea, every single item, including the people in those nations, are owned by the Vatican. Everything. And they're owned through the banks. It's the one thing to have control of the banks and to own all the money, but then it's another thing to own the banker. And the Vatican owns the bankers. They are, these Babylonian Talmudic people are basically just the bagman for the mobsters that control the world banking system and the world religions. They're all controls through the Vatican.
Okay, so you're saying there's 13 people that control all of the nations of the world and all of the religions of the world.
Right. Yeah, well, they control it through their powers. They're even above the Vatican and the World Council of Churches and all these other organizations. Even the so-called Illuminati are beneath the council, the Druidic Council. And there's representatives that sit on the council, like the Black Pope, the Jesuit Pope, is one of the 13. And the head of the whole CEO is the Pindar. And these are very real. This is not imaginary. Our world is completely controlled by Satan. No one advances anywhere in government unless they have been totally vetted by the dark side, have gone through dissociative identity disorder programming, sex magic ritual, and human sacrifice, and has been cursed by their ancestors so that they're controlled and avatared by demonic entities. No one. In any country. That's why people don't realize how, when Jesus was taken high above the temple, why Satan said he can own every empire. He wasn't telling a lie when he confronted God. I mean, he's not going to confront God and tell a lie because God's going to know the difference. Jesus knew the difference. He was just given a choice. Worship me and I'll pull this away from you. You don't have to go through the suffering. So what's happening here on earth right now is the end of the lease for Satan is coming, and his last thrust is a biometric, omniscient, omnipotent control system, and he has to have these various levels of dialectics and even leak it so that we will believe the lie that somehow the Fed Reserve is going to turn on America. The Fed Reserve is America. We're the new Atlantis. You know, the book that was written called the Voynich Documents by Sir Francis Bacon, the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I. They actually visualized and actually used transdimensional channeling that this was going to be the new Atlantis, and all the high-level Masons knew that this was the reincarnation of ancient Atlantis with all the powers to create the New World Order. So America is the center post of the New World Order. It's not peripheral. It's the absolute center. It's the origin of the mark of the beast comes from America, not Brussels, not Beijing, not China. China is a joke. Completely a construct of the British bankers, including even Mao Zedong receiving his weapons. China is a paper tiger where they're creating nine new people who are highly trained and only one job. And now their economy is in such hyperinflation because they printed so much money, trying to be, quote, the world currency standard, that they have got such hyperinflation their country is ready to blow apart and have a revolution. So people need to kind of see a bigger picture. When I hear these stories being circulated through DHS, they need to understand that what's really going on is that we're marching very, very quickly toward a world peace treaty in the Middle East. That's why all these nations are literally trying to polarize the situation, including us supporting people that are natural enemies like Al-Qaeda. They're even taking nuns and making them enemy combatants in Syria and killing Christians. America is doing this because they want to polarize the situation so that they can bring about the treaty and eventually a peace treaty that will cause every nation to become obedient to a biometric world currency and a new world police force, rapid reaction force for humanitarian aid under the United Nations and the world government. So they want to make sure that there's Chinese troops, American troops, and European troops, all controlled by the UN. And of course, with the power to tax through the global carbon garbage, they will have infinite power, and they'll own tons of land in every country on earth, including the ocean floor. The Treaty of the Seas handed over basically the entire resources of the ocean floor to the United Nations last year. You knew that, right?
Something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah, so when I hear about the Federal Reserve saying they're going to pull it on America, it's like the Federal Reserve is America. America was founded by high-level satanic Masons. It wasn't founded by Christians. There were only Christians there in name only. If you actually look at the history of the deists, like Thomas Jefferson and these other characters, these people were not Christians in the actual word of the law. If you want to actually make a checklist of what a Christian is, they were deists and they were high-level Masons, and they were very intelligent, and they were channeling transdimensional demonic entities. And they had a purpose, and they had very little resistance because they had the collaboration of the King of Britain and the European royalty after the feigned so-called revolution, which was not true at all because they came back underneath the control of the crown very shortly afterwards. So I don't believe that, I know that these events are going to happen, but I don't believe that it's the end.
Wait a minute. Now you're saying that the founding fathers were demons.
The founding fathers were high-level deists, D-E-I-S. They believed in gods. There were many gods like high-level Masons. They were deists. In fact, you actually can read a Jeffersonian Bible that actually has all the scriptures and all the red letter words of Jesus cut right out of it.
And then you're saying that after revolution that didn't take place, we were still under the authority of the crown?
They came back under corporate authority. And that's why they even feigned the idea of not having national banks, but in actual fact, every time they've actually managed to crawl in and get control through the high-level Masons. So the high-level Masons have made sure that America is completely under. For example, most of the power is through the laws. The British Authorized Registry is a bar association. Every lawyer in America is under the crown. Do you know that? The Bar Association. It's British. Same way in Russia. Every single member of the Bar Association in Russia is under the British crown. Same in China. They're under the Bar Association. British authorized registry, higher than a gentleman and less than a lord. And of course, the royalty of Britain is under the Vatican. Period. All territory and all property of every king and every principality and power in Europe and all of their functionary countries that they founded are under the control of the Vatican and totally owns all these territories, peoples, and currencies. They're all owned by the Vatican.
Well, I thought a minute ago you said that everything was controlled by these 13 people that report.
Right, but they use the control of the properties through the Vatican. There's many other aspects. The media, I mean, look at the media. It's all controlled by these high-level Satanists too. Right? If you go to Hollywood, you find that they're all sabotaging Satanists. You know, basically 99%. They'll call them Jews. They're not Jews at all. They're Khazarian Satanists. They're ancient Babylonian warlocks. And even from the area of Khazaria, where they just converted because at that time Judaism wasn't Judaism of the ancient Bible. Judaism was a demonic religion that had no resemblance whatsoever to ancient Judaism. It's completely Babylonian, pagan, and Satanistic. I've had Jews from the Shivas in New York have actually told me straight up when I wanted them to teach me 25 years ago how to speak Hebrew, because I thought, oh, well, I got some Cohen in my family going back 2,000 years ago. They were real Jews. Not Jews, but real Hebrews, because the Cohens, by the way, are not Jews, they're Hebrews. And he told me, we're warlocks. You guys don't get it. You Christians don't understand it. We're closer to Harry Potter. So every crisis is contrived. Even the contrived crisis of 9/11, Oklahoma City, Ruby Ridge, Sandy Hook. Even the weather we have here, the contrived drought we have off our coast, is to make certain we have a drought that accepts environmental issues like global warming as the reason why we're in trouble, and won't pay attention to the fact that the water coming isn't radioactive, because they won't let rain from the North Pacific come in here, because people would panic if they've got nosebleeds, abdominal bloating, vertigo.
Wait a minute. We've covered so many.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, when you look at the big picture here, the financial side of it, these characters, so let's say they do a bank holiday and they devalue the currency 65 to 70%. This is exactly what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did. This is what these characters did back before World War II, and they bankrupted the country and took everybody's gold and devalued the currency by 70%. It's standard operational procedure. I'm certain, long before you told me this, and others like Gerald Celente, that it's going to happen this year. But it's part of the game. It's the rollout of a world currency that'll capture Russia and China and force them to accept a world biometric currency they won't be able to trade. China right now, if they don't have a place to sell or market their things, they got 100,000 warehouses storing stuff like crazy, and they can't shut the warehouses down, or they're going to have their factories down, or they're going to have a revolution. So they're building warehouses to stick the stuff they're making that they can't even store. Interesting, eh? Hundreds of thousands of warehouses.
Okay, again, let me kind of pause there for a second. Boy, you just threw a whole bunch of stuff at me.
Yeah. What you're hearing from me is not the same as what you're going to hear from others. You'll hear from Gerald Celente one thing or another, and they'll give you a little piece of one of the layers of this battle. But at the top layer, you got Satan actually ready to put a mark on every individual and have biometric currency and have a cybernetic world copy of everybody that's considered an icon or a node, and have total control over all transactions on the planet, and everything else is illegal, including gold, silver, and bartering. Any cryptocurrency, everything else, it'll be illegal, including even cash in your pocket.
Okay, but now, hold on a second. So, here's what we've covered. We've covered that there's 13 people that report to Satan that control everything.
Right.
All of this is controlled through the Vatican, that every attorney in the world that's a part of the Bar Association is under the control of the Crown.
Right.
That the Founding Fathers were not Christians, that the Revolution was a farce, and we were still under the authority of the Crown, and now we're just one giant world corporation.
Right.
Am I understanding all that correctly?
Yes.
And don't take this the wrong way. Please don't take this the wrong way, but do you really believe all of that?
Absolutely. I got proof for it, too. It's taken a long road to get there, and I'll tell you what, the worst thing was realizing that even the revolution was was feigned, and even the attempts that were done and repeatedly pushed back to stop a U.S. national bank under the control of the British was ended completely when they set up the Federal Reserve System in 1913, when they hand over all coining of currency against the Constitution to the Federal Reserve, non-federal, non-reserve. And then within a matter of 7 months, we were in World War I. And within a matter of 20 years, 1933, from 1913, we were functionally bankrupt. And our nation has been bankrupt since 1933, with every single person's birth certificate chattelized as a collateral against the debt of America. So America has been totally stripped to the bone like a Thanksgiving turkey, and the poor people of America don't understand the real game that's going on here, because the layers are hard for people to peel back, and they want to believe, because you see, the Constitution is in my heart, it's in your heart. Although we aren't consigners of it, it's actually just the states. If you actually read the legal factors, it's only a contract between the states and the federal government. It doesn't involve the people. And the Bill of Rights and so on, but what they've done is made them null and void. They've turned us into a corporation. And that's why administrative law is all they have. That's why Obama doesn't need to go to law. He has a pen and he has a phone. He realizes we're under administrative rule, especially because we're in a state of war, and we have been for many years, and we're also functionally bankrupt. So we have a administrative dictator that's acting as a functionary of these bankers. That's what Obama is. Very disturbing, but it's true. And the thing is, once people realize what's going on, they also realize what stories are being put out there, or what they wanted to get out. And because even if they do something, they want you to believe they're a lie at a specific level so they can manipulate at another level. Yeah, the Federal Reserve is going to really put the screws to us. Yeah, really. That's like two twins. One twin is going to strangle another twin. I don't think so. Or going to kill their mother. You know, the Federal Reserve cannot turn on us. The Federal Reserve is us. We are literally functionaries of the New World Order. The entire nation is predicated on the idea that our debt is our primary, if you want to call it, economic resource. And when the Federal Reserve is doing this kind of game with China, and China's playing along with it and so on, and European and British, it's all to move us toward a kind of cataclysm so they can create a kind of crisis that's so malignant that everybody has to crowd to the edge of the raft to try to survive and accept a biometric world currency. Pretty clever, isn't it? Pretty damned evil.
I'm speechless. And if you knew me well enough, you know that's a very difficult task to accomplish.
Yeah, it's really true. Unfortunately, it's true. And the thing is, I've had so many contacts, IAQ level security clearance in 20 years ago in Colorado Springs at CCOM, Colorado Center for Ahmed, and U.S. Space Command Strategic Defense, Star Wars, and even in the last number of years when I've been doing my show full-time and so on, I have so many contacts, and also on a spiritual level, supernatural access to information, and all of it correlates exactly that this is what's really going on. That's why people have no idea of the lockdown, just how tight things are. Even the scripted actions of Putin and Yanukovych. Like Yanukovych takes off like a little child, just like Gorbachev, as if he's going to disappear to his dacha in the Black Sea and no one's going to find him in special forces. If Russia's special forces or our special forces want you dead, it doesn't matter if you're in the middle of the winter in Antarctica in an igloo a half-mile underground. You've got 48 hours to live. So this idea that somehow Gorbachev could get away or Yanukovych could get away, and they just let him go, they didn't stop him in his plane, and then all of a sudden now the Russians are in there. It's all scripted. It's all scripted. Everything is controlled. It's terrible, but it's true. And the regular people die because they believe in one level of the story, or, they don't even understand. For example, at the beginning of Gulf War II, they had 6 operational ground-based robots, warrior robots. Have you ever heard of those? At the end of Gulf War II, they had 26,000 that they withdrew from Iraq, 2007. I was recruited in 1977 at UCLA. I was going to work on the World MS Tissue Brain Repository with Dr. Wallace Tortolot in UCLA, but there were 4 other projects he wanted me to work on because they had a custom CT scan implanted for microelectrodes, and they're trying to break the code of the cortex of the human mind and directly link to create battlefield super warriors that are cybernetic with genetic enhancement. And they're going to use a female template. And I turned them down, although my first wife was dying of MS, because I wanted to work on MS research, because the other 4 projects were all involved with making super soldiers, genetically engineering, using cybernetic and genetic enhancement. And I know in exquisite detail everything that they're doing. And it's, the average person just can't conceive this because they never had the contact. Well, I have the technical background as well as the first-hand, not second-hand contact. And I turned the buggers down back in 77. That's a long time ago, 37 years. And it was very advanced, and they had a split helmet for converting thoughts to onboard commands on an F-14 fighter. They had a custom CT scan implanter for putting electrodes and platinum and palladium electrodes into various nuclei in the brain, auditory and visual cortex. Research had started in 47 in Tavistock, England. Manager Institute in Topeka, Kansas. Johns Hopkins, UC Irvine, University of California in Los Angeles, etc. And they're working in Moscow in collaboration with Russians. The Russians were collaborating with us in the Super Soldier program all along, right through the Cold War. Interesting, hey? Yeah, what's really happening and what people think's happening is quite a bit different. Even these narrow space objects, I took care of employees working in Space Command, and they first thing they told us is said, we control every cubic centimeter of space between here and Mars. I said, you mean the moon? He said, they got real angry with me. This is back in July 10th, 1994. And over the next year and a half, because they told me everything, straight up. They said, because we don't want you to freak out when you find out what's really going on. It was pretty eye-opening. So, what I try to do on my show is I tell people, don't you have to believe me. Just ask questions. Why is this information allowed to leak out? And why do they do this big dance and then all of a sudden let somebody go? Right? If they really wanted you, they just grab you and put you in prison and shut you up. They want this information out there. Right? Or they kill you. And there's lots of ways they can hit you with a harmonic weapon. Microwave. They can hit you with a Ice-9 dart with mycotoxins. All kinds of ways of killing you that nobody would even be detecting toxicology. Right?
Again, I'm speechless.
Yeah. And I know, because I know all about these things. I know patching and microdose and, tunable microchips and all kinds of nasty stuff. It's pretty scary stuff. But the fact is, I want to know what they're up to next, because it gives me an idea of how far along the script they think they can push it. So if they're talking about a specific near-Earth object, it's because they obviously want to hype up the population. Oh, be very afraid, be very afraid. If a 3.5-mile object hit the Earth, it's an extinction-level event. This is bigger than what hit with the dinosaurs.
Okay, but you're talking about layers upon layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of disinformation.
That's right, and various layers have a grain of truth and a grain of falseness, and there are going to be casualties in each of these layers. So, for example, there were almost 100 people killed in Kiev and the square there, but it's part of the game. It's part of the script. It's part of the script that Yanukovych took off. It's part of the script the Russians moved into Crimea. It's part of the script that America will feign that they want to do something to stop Russia, and they're going to do nothing. It's part of the script that China's going to pull off all these schemes and continue to bedevil all the countries around them and try to make dirty deals to exchange, do exchanges of oil or whatever for renminbi and yuan currency. You can't bully your way into becoming the world reserve currency. It just means that you're trying to, you're willing to do almost anything to maintain an economy. And now, of course, the old guard in communist China are panicking because the young people rising up behind them are totally pissed off at them. You've got a giant population that if they even turn off the presses and stop making things, they're going to end up with a revolution inside China. And most of these leaders will end up shot dead. They're getting old anyway, the old guard communists, and they're very fat. I mean, these, if you're a communist leader, your child goes to the University of Spoiled Children in California, you got an Airstream jet, you've got private apartments and villas in different countries around the world. They don't live like communists. These guys live like billionaires, because 80% of the new billionaires in the world are Chinese. And their populations are enslaved, like Foxconn facility, where they got millions of people working in sleeping in hammocks, working 16, 18 hours a day, and they have to put nets so that people don't jump off the roof and kill themselves. So, reality is a kick in the head. Let's put it that way. I'm not afraid to look at it straight up, right up to even the spiritual stuff. Because people will lose, they'll get to a certain level, and if they don't understand the spiritual side of this, and the ancient technology of avataring literally the flesh of human beings to control them, they will never understand the royal families or the global control by transdimensional, ultra-intelligent, evil entities. They'll never understand it. They'll always hit the glass like a bug, never comprehending. And money itself is all a scam anyway. I mean, that's why Bitcoin, its only value is that people believe it had value. But it's really no different with any other reserve currency. That's all based on prestidigitation and magic. Right? Even the value of gold and silver is in a sense a game. Shiny metal, you know. I talked to an engineer at Huntington Beach that had a patent. He sent me the patent 6 years ago that you can pull gold out of the water right off of Huntington Beach, California, at about $234 an ounce at the time. And within 4 months of him sending the patent, they killed him. I didn't want that sucker out there saying, and getting on the media, like my show, and broadcasting it. So the first time I talked to him, I got all this information. The next time I tried to find out, he was dead. They took him out. Interesting, hey? So, as much as they'll say there's a near-space object coming, or there's this object thing happening around tax day, the real issue is we've got a peace treaty coming, which Satan is absolutely determined to put a blood sacrifice on the Temple Mount, which will start the last 7 years of secular history, because he thinks he's going to win. And of course, it's like Aleister Crowley, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. All these politicians and Hollywood people and people stuffing their pockets think that whatever they want is okay, because that's the rule of their own will is God. They don't want to cede their will to the Creator God, because that's the only way you could do good, is to hear God and do it. Do what God says. So we have greedy, self-centered, narcissistic maniacs who are determined that they want everything, even if they have to destroy the earth to get it. So the ultimate survival thing is not just even survival skills, it's surviving the spiritual thing that's coming, because people are going to be deceived that this financial thing is part of a great delusion. And this Pope is part of it. I mean, the Vatican is a very great part of it. This guy that's the Black Pope is one of the most evil men in history. This Kurt guy, Francis. And we can't count that Mr. Putin is wonderful either, although he claims to be a Christian, because ultimately he's a dictator. Now there's Obama, so we have a bunch of real bad guys, all wearing different masks, all ready to corral us into a mess. And it's getting beyond. It's seeing beyond the dialectic of the space chess, so we don't get overwhelmed by it or always be crying wolf when they're going to do these things. As I said already, my wife went today to Pacific Credit Union. She's moving her money around, buying gold and silver, because she knows they're going to do a bank holiday and grab people's money and bail it in. That's a given. When you say in April, that's a plausible early hard date because it's around tax day, and it's also a Hebrew feast day, the Pesach or Passover.
Right.
So those all make total sense. There's going to be some hard dates like that, or September, which is right around Tabernacles, and September that you're talking about is probably around the Jewish New Year, Yom Teruah. So it makes sense that these globalists, because they like to go on specific mathematical and Hebrew feast days and parts of the Golden Triangle and so on, they would like to have these mathematical principles being honored because it's part of their Kabbalah. So that's my perspective. Can you tell me some more about what you're seeing? Because then you can integrate what you said, and then you can see there's layers of this that go a lot higher and higher that are very twisted. When someone thinks they're at the highest level of masonry, I always have to say, I'm sorry, you're wrong. Because I've ministered to 90th degree Masons, and they thought they were at the pinnacle. I said, no, the highest a human being can be is 180th. Not 90th. So it's very different than what people think. You know, there's 11 levels of illumination after you become a 33 degree Mason. So 11 degrees of illumination, that's only 11 degrees up from that. So it's a long way up. Human beings can deteriorate before they become totally and abjectly, completely evil.
Okay.
Yeah, it's breathtaking, isn't it? And every religion on earth, by the way, that includes Christian, Buddhist, atheist, transhumanist, every single public religion on earth is either infiltrated or controlled by Satanism. Every single one. And there are Christians within the Catholic Church, but they know about Jesus. They have filthy rags on them. Same way in the Christian Church, a lot of them don't realize much of what they accept, like Easter and other things, are totally pagan. Easter, Christmas, lots of other things. You know, all kinds of so-called parts of their dogma are completely pagan. Like goddess worship, you know, Mother Mary and all this stuff. That's goddess worship. That's Ishtar, Semiramis, Diana. But they don't want to hear that because it's, oh, that's my religion. I said, no, that's what you were taught. Jesus didn't teach that. Every little Hebrew boy at the time of Jesus could have had a biological father and a mother that were Hebrew. And it didn't mean that God had to impregnate a woman, which meant basically a virgin had to be a female who had never had a pregnancy before. It didn't mean that she had to be, quote, sinless. And of course, how would she be sinless if she was the one, an archetype of Eve, who actually gave the forbidden fruit, which is to decide for yourself what was good or evil, to her husband Adam? How would she be sinless? Which is blatantly ridiculous. So I ask people questions like, you know, what soul did Jesus have? And they said, well, I don't know. I said, how about his soul was the Holy Spirit? What was the Holy Spirit? It's just another form of God. There's not three persons, there's only one. You know, Jesus was a man with a father and a mother, a physical father and mother, not a woman that got raped by God, and certainly wasn't sinless. This is basically goddess worship that goes right back. If you study paganism, it's 100% pagan. Every Jew knows this. Even these Sabbatean Satanists know this. But Christians, if you try to tell them, they get all offended and say, oh, that's not true, that's not true. And I said, look, I was raised a Catholic, and I said, they didn't want you to even pray to God. Go through the saints, go to Mary. His mother will take the phone call. It's ridiculous. They don't have a personal relationship with God, so they want to go through a mediator, or they want to believe in foolish dogma, and it doesn't give them any power. So it's a very different perspective on things, but God's called me to have a very specific way of bringing things back to simplicity and truth rather than foolishness. Because, you know, you don't want to end up being caught as a whistleblower without tempering it with the fact that you know that this is part of a dialectic. It's a multi-layer game that's being played. It's a very evil damn game too. Because how many times a whistleblower's been wrong, or they've said something and it might be partially right, but the outcome was all manipulated and controlled. Right?
Okay.
So Dan, when they told you about these events, about this one coming up in September, did he give you any more specifics?
Well, we can just jump back like that.
Well, yeah, I'm jumping back because I don't know. I didn't get any other questions from me because what I did is I did a data dump and I put people in a state of shock, partly because, you know, you're going to have to go back and pray on this. You don't have to accept anything I said, or even I call the spirit words of what I said, because some of it's patently pretty damned offensive to a person's previous belief systems. Whether it's the idea that our founding fathers were Satanists, so they're fulfilling the Voynich document in Francis Bacon's plan for a new Atlantis. And if you actually go read back through the Library of Congress and read about Thomas Jefferson and other so-called founding fathers, including Franklin, you actually realize that these people were not saints by any means, and they certainly weren't Christians. They're high-level Masons. Do you know that every president in the United States, including George Washington, goes through a ceremony at the Masonic Temple right across from the Washington Monument? And they actually ask for the spirit of Osiris to come through them and for them to be controlled by the power of the darkness that actually takes over the presidency. Every single one. Standard procedure. The transmogrification of the president through the power of Osiris. They go through what's called the Osiris ritual. Every single new inaugurated president. You can read it yourself, pull it up. But you see, the real world that people want to believe, the world that they want to believe, never existed. The world that does exist is the world that I know. Both beautiful and wonderful, both wonderful and horrifying. But it's certainly different than what people believe.
Yeah, I'm still hung up on the fact that the entire population of the world is controlled by 3 people that somehow tied to the Vatican.
Yeah, it is. Every single banker, just think of it this way. Every single bank on earth, except for these few countries that are trying to mop up, which is why all of this dialectic of war is going on in Syria, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and now Russia, which is, of course, taken over from the oligarchs, because we did have Rothschild-style banks, but Putin, after Yeltsin took over, is playing this game to try to oust and jail the Rothschild bankers that basically told the Russian KGB and GRU, give us all the money, and they bought up all the resources to become instant billionaires. So the Russians were kind of on the tendrils of Sabbatean Satanists. I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution was entirely Sabbatean Jewish. These are Sabbatean Jews that did the Bolshevik Revolution. I took care of an employee in 1977 at the Banfield Pavilion in Vancouver General who had gassed in the First World War. That's how old I am. I'm 62. And I was doing internal medicine. That's 1977. In the Vancouver Banfield Pavilion, who actually marched into Leningrad then, which is St. Petersburg, and into Moscow. And they took both cities with the American Highlanders Division. And so the American Canadian Highlanders Division and I think it was it was one of the divisions out of Georgia, Fort Benning, Georgia, that marched in there and took over these cities without any resistance whatsoever. And it was 6 months before the guns, which are paid by J.P. Morgan, paid for by the Rothschilds, arrived in Moscow because the Bolsheviks had no weapons. So American and Canadian forces actually took those 2 main cities and held them for the Bolsheviks until their guns arrived. Made in Pennsylvanian factories. Paid for by J.P. Morgan as a functionary of the Rothschilds of Europe. So the Russians are fully aware that when the British operatives killed the Tsar and Tsarina of Russia, that this is all an operation by the royalty of Britain to kill the royalty of Russia. And they're cousins, of course. They all look like dead ringers. Because they're all interconnected. So it's one satanic group against another. What Putin's doing now is he's actually talking about possibly resurrecting the Tsarina, because they have a direct blood descendant of the Tsar and Tsarina that actually could be reinstituted in a crown in Russia as a Tsarina. And he's now elected as the keeper of the Greek Orthodox Church now of Russia, Russian Orthodox. Putin. They call him Saint Putin, so, he's pretty clever. But ultimately he's evil. Just like our president's evil. Another sock puppet for Satan.
And you, please don't take this the wrong way, because it's your radio show and everything, but you really believe all of that?
It's not a belief system. You see, belief cannot be blind. It has to be based on facts. And you can dig up facts about the Federal Reserve and the creature from Jekyll Island. You can dig up information about the founding of America. You can go to the Library of Congress and read about the Red Letter Bible, where, Jeffersonian Bible. I mean, every single thing I've told you, I've woven together connected all the dots, from the founders of the nation to the high-level Masons that conceived it even 500 years ago with Sir Francis Bacon, to everything. I mean, when you look at 1913 with the setting up of the Federal Reserve on Christmas Eve, little proper even quorum, everything is a fraud, and people basically are like little children that don't want to believe it because it's too awful. It's too wrong. It's not like they think, not the nation that they know or love. And they can't chip it away from my heart, because I'm an American and I'm a Christian, but I'm going to fight for it, not because it's chipped away at the courts, but because the courts are no longer valid, or they're corrupt, or the American Constitution and the government, the way they operate the voting system, the ballot box, has now got electronic voter scams. It still doesn't change the fact that I'm an American. I'm going to fight for the Bill of Rights, and for the fact that our rights come from our Creator and not from a government. But the way Obama acts, the rights come from him and his pen. The rights come from him and his dictators at the top in the globalists and the United Nations that basically say this is time for war against Libya or Syria. And they just dictate to this guy. He's just as they say in Hebrew, or Yiddish, they call him a Schwarze or black. He's a Jewish black operating as a functionary of the globalist bankers, and they're just working as functionaries of the Vatican. All the bankers are completely obedient to the Vatican, every one of them.
Yeah, I thought you said that the bankers were controlled by these 13 Satanists.
Bankers are controlled by through the Vatican. The Vatican is just one of the 13 groups there.
Wow.
Vatican is just one of 13 of the other 12. The Pindar is
It's not. I don't think it's that people are wanting to hold on to their beliefs. I think it's just what you're talking about is layer upon layer upon layer of disinformation and
right.
deception.
But you can pull it up. You can.
It's too complicated.
Well, it is. But if you start digging, for example, we just had discussions last week, and we talked about this with Deborah Tavares. And if you go to her website, stopthecrime.net, and she pulls a book up dated from 1933 by Judge Dale. Just go to stopthecrime.net. You can pull up the PDF yourself, and you read his book, and he talks about the fact America is completely a fraud, that it's basically a corporation, and that America is run as an administrative law, and these people are just administrative agents of the corporation. And of course, this is a step-by-step deconstruction of America, which was conceived originally to be a quote republic, like Plato's Republic. The first several attempts to try to set up a federal bank were stopped, but ultimately they got what they wanted. And America is just a golem for the globalist bankers. How many times have Americans died or got dismembered or permanently injured prosecuting wars all over the world, not for America's good, but for global entanglements for the global bankers? We go to a country and kill someone because they won't use our money. Saddam Hussein basically wanted to set up an oil bourse. So did Muammar Gaddafi. I mean, he did great things for his people, and despite these people being dictators, they were a hell of a lot better than having civil war and death and destruction. And so we waltz in there and say, well, you're not going to have a currency to get rid of the American petrodollar. We're going to kill you. So you can do lots of bad things, but if you try to get rid of the petrodollar, you're a dead man. So what... if there were real moves by Europe and Britain to actually get rid of the American dollar, firstly, most of the money that's being loaned to these countries, like the European Union, is the Fed Reserve. They're the only source of money and the only reason why the Fed Reserve has any money is they're chattelized against America, and every citizen and every corporation, every square inch of our territory is chattelized and controlled by the Fed Reserve. It's too bizarre, so people don't want to buy it because it seems so complicated. They made it so shrouded. But if you read these different documents by people like Judge Dale, you say, oh my gosh, this is what's really going on. Do we have sovereignty? Yes, you can be a sovereign citizen. But what we have is complete layers of lies upon lies. Putin is smart enough to see all this. That's why he doesn't drink vodka. He's a non-vodka drinking Russian. That's a very unusual thing. I used this joke years ago. God allowed the Scots to have single malt liquor so they wouldn't rule the world, and the Russians to have vodka so they wouldn't rule the world. And now we have a non-vodka drinking Russian, so he's going to rule the world. Because he will become eventually the beast dictator. You can see America laying down its arms, demilitarizing, not building new nuclear weapons for 20 years. Europe is a joke in terms of its military. No one could stand up to Russia, including China, if they decide to go crazy. And yes, we have level 10 weapons, but they won't use those because they're going to take PDD-60, a policy put in during the first term of Clinton, that we won't do a counterstrike even if we have 100 million Americans dead from a first-strike nuclear offensive. That's a fact. I worked and took care of one of my best friends was the head of U.S. Missile Defense Command. We even had dinner at my place, and we talk about these things. He's the guy that would get a call from the president and the first... the guys in the Joint Chiefs of Staff transferring the launch codes for the submarine launch nuclear missiles, and he had his Bible tabbed to Psalm 91.1 and Colonel Lynn Wills, and we would actually have discussions right at my table in Colorado Springs. So God's put me physically in these places so I'd have first-hand experience, not second-hand, and first-hand contacts to really know what's really going on, and then supernatural revelations as to what's happening, which no one else has. So when you integrate it, it all makes sense, including the physical documents, the physical contacts, everything. It's very straightforward. It's really not that complicated. It's very straightforward.
Okay.
And that's why when you're thinking about these events, it's okay to tell people, but you want to make sure you temper it with this is one level of the dialectic of lives. Just like Obamacare is going to bring in health care for all Americans when he let the corporations and the insurance companies write it, the drug companies. He wasn't even bringing in socialized medicine like Canada, where they control the price of drugs, which is still in indentured slavery for the health professionals that are piecemeal, paying a fee for service. No. What he was doing was setting it up so that they could eat like piranhas, the public, and still kill seniors and babies, and make sure everybody pays through the nose. So everything that all these politicians do is malignantly and viciously evil. They're not capable of good. And that includes Mr. Putin too. Many people might think he's a saint. He isn't. He's just a lot more clever than most.
Okay. Well, okay. I don't even know where to go from all of that. I
Yeah.
really don't.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's my take on it, Bob. So yeah, these announcements are important for people to understand. I'd like to have much more specifics on the science of the approaching Earth object and its actual trajectory. And I have contacts that I can cross-check that'll tell me if there is something like that. But we track all kinds of space objects down to the size of an eraser, and they have ways of removing these from trajectories from Earth, and we do that all the time. I mean, America's had advanced fleets of space vehicles in space that can travel sublight and above light speed for decades. We have all kinds of technology out there that people just don't imagine we have, but we do. And a lot of it is not just human, it's non-human technology that's basically, most people don't realize all scientists, and this includes German, all were alchemists. And that means they're all basically channeling transdimensional entities to get occult knowledge and then went back to the laboratory to test it. So when you talk about the Society of the Black Sun, which is in Germany, or the Thule Society, or the Society of the Bell, which is basically a group of scientists that use technology to use plasma physics of mercury to create a gravitonic field or a Higgs field, anti-gravity technology in space vehicles, they channeled this from demonic entities. And then they went back to the laboratory. So they're really, all modern scientists at the highest levels are all basically alchemists. It's a form of wizardry. And people find it hard to believe. They think it's just discovered through the normal channels of discovery, when in fact they actually channel information and knowledge and then go back to the lab and test it. And that's how they leap forward in their technology. That's why in the Second World War they had Foo Fighters out there that the British Air Force chased that were traveling at enormous speeds, because those were made in Germany. The Germans had anti-gravitonic technology that we literally took over and had operating by the 1950s. And I can explain it too, technically, if people don't want to believe it, that I can do that. I can explain it. So it's important to get corroborating knowledge on this space object and corroborating information. Like if you get a hold of your friend, if he can actually get some more documents of what specifically they're going to do in April, because I do believe that they're going to do a bank holiday. I do believe they're going to devalue the currency. I do believe they're going to have one or more catastrophes, because if Japan goes, they had to restart their nuclear reactors, or within 30 to 60 days, all of their creditor nations, including the BIS, was going to consider on the balance sheet all of their nuclear reactors as now a liability, and that would immediately put them into the red. So Japan had to turn their nuclear reactors on. It was the bankers that told them to do so, or they were going to go bankrupt right away, probably by April. Did you know that? So the Japanese now reversed their policy. Instead of turning off all the reactors, they're all being turned back on again, even though they're sitting on fault lines. Many of those reactor sites were damaged by Fukushima, by this earthquake and tsunami. So the bankers have said, no, we're not going to denuclearize Japan. We want you guys to blow up and make North America a radioactive dead zone. And by the way, the Japanese were collaborating with the Israelis, providing the nuclear materials to make lots of advanced weapons for the Samson option if anybody attacked them. So the Israelis are armed to the teeth. And they even have ImageSat space-based weapon systems and imaging systems. The Israelis have their own satellites even This tiny little strip of country has its own satellites and weapon systems in space. And of course, they're infiltrating every single bit of our intelligence services and every single level of the government, and our phone systems and everything is all controlled by Israel. The little pea-fart nation Israel is in control of all of our intelligence. And they're not our ally. I said the best solution is to annex Israel and make the Joint Chiefs of Staff get control of them, and so they had to sit in the second term of Obama and Bush. I mean, they had to put a division in Dimona to make sure the Israelis wouldn't fire nuclear weapons at their immediate neighbors. Bush did, because he didn't even trust the Israelis that they would actually not launch a nuclear war. And that's even Bush, and he's an idiot. Yep. So, Bob, that's my take on it. So, take it or leave it. That's why I see it. But give me more information. I'd really like to know more on these near space objects and what they're planning on talking about in specific, accurate details, because it just tells me one layer of the dialectic of lies. Because what I see coming is the mark of the beast, and there's not a man who's ever had a pulse who knows more about the mark than I do. Not anyone who's ever lived. And I see it coming very, very quickly. All this dialectic of war and rumors of war and Pulse Peace Treaty is all lining up for two things. The partition of the state of Israel, the setting up of the blood sacrifice will start the last 7 years of secular history, and the mark of the beast. And they're on parallel tracks.
Okay.
Take care and God bless.
Same to you, brother.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.